In 1960, the average American man weighed 166 pounds. Only 13% of adults qualified as obese, and the military rejected just 6% of young men for being overweight. But today, the average man weighs nearly 200 pounds. Obesity has tripled past 40%. And 1 in 4 military recruits gets turned away for carrying too much weight. Something went wrong. And the strange part is, several of the foods that kept those men of the 1960s lean are now banned, restricted, or effectively illegal in the United States. It was 1962, and a typical American kitchen looked nothing like the one you are standing in right now. A cast iron skillet sat on the stove, seasoned with years of bacon grease and lard. A jar of rendered fat rested next to the burner, scooped out with a spoon every morning before the eggs hit the pan. The refrigerator held whole milk, real butter, and eggs from a local farm, sometimes with bits of straw still clinging to the shells. Dinner was pot roast or liver and onions, served with boiled potatoes and green beans from the backyard garden. There were no microwave meals, no drive-through windows, no delivery apps. Nobody in that kitchen counted calories. Nobody tracked macros, and nobody would have called what they were doing a diet. But here is what is worth noticing. The whole family sat down together at a kitchen table that measured maybe 4 feet across. The reason those men stayed lean was deceptively simple. Nearly everything a family ate in 1962 came from whole, unprocessed ingredients, cooked at home from scratch. If you lined up a 1960s dinner plate next to a modern one, the difference would stop you cold. The old plate measured 9 inches across. Today's is 12. A fast food hamburger back then was roughly the size of what we now call a kid's meal, and a bottle of Coca-Cola held just 6.5 ounces, not the 20-ounce bottles lining gas station coolers today. Even a restaurant steak was only about 6 ounces, less than half the 16-ounce slabs served at most chain restaurants now. Everything was built on a smaller scale. But size was not the only difference. However, the food itself was different too, in ways that would shock a modern dietitian. Lard was the primary cooking fat in most American households. Families rendered it themselves or bought it fresh from the local butcher shop. Butter was spread generously on bread and melted over vegetables without a second thought. Whole eggs were eaten every single morning, and full-fat milk, often raw and unpasteurized, arrived on the front porch in glass bottles delivered by a milkman in a white uniform. This was not considered unusual or unhealthy. It was just an ordinary weekday in an ordinary American home. But what those families did not know was that nearly every one of these ingredients was about to be targeted. What happened next is the part that still doesn't make sense. One by one, many of these everyday kitchen staples were banned, restricted, or driven completely out of the American diet. Take sassafras root beer. For generations, American men drank root beer brewed from real sassafras bark at soda fountains and family cookouts across the country. Then, in the early 1960s, the FDA banned saffrole, the natural compound found in sassafras oil, after animal studies suggested it might cause cancer in laboratory rats. Traditional root beer vanished from store shelves almost overnight. The version you buy today in the grocery aisle is artificially flavored, a completely different drink wearing the same name. Then came raw milk. For most of American history, fresh milk went straight from the dairy cow to the kitchen icebox without anything happening in between. Families drank it cold, cooked with it daily, and considered it one of the most nourishing foods available. But federal regulators banned the interstate sale of raw milk, citing concerns about bacteria. And by the 1980s, state after state had added its own restrictions on top of the federal rule. Today, selling raw milk is outright illegal in roughly half the country. The FDA considers it a serious public health threat. Advocates on the other side argue that pasteurization destroys beneficial enzymes and nutrients that humans consume safely for thousands of years. The debate between regulators and raw milk advocates is fierce and ongoing. But the practical result speaks for itself. The fresh milk your grandfather poured from a glass bottle on his family's dairy farm is now, in many jurisdictions, treated like contraband. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Organ meats, those cheap and nutrient-dense staples of the working-class dinner table, began disappearing too. In the 1960s, beef liver, chicken hearts, and kidney stew showed up on plates from Detroit to Dallas every single week. A serving of beef liver delivers more vitamin A, iron, and B12 per ounce than nearly any other food on Earth. But in 1971, the USDA banned livestock lungs from human consumption in the United States, citing concerns about gastrointestinal fluids contaminating the tissue during slaughter. That ruling killed traditional dishes like Scottish haggis on American soil and helped push all organ meats further to the margins of the national diet. Today, most Americans under 40 have never tasted liver. Their grandfathers ate it as a matter of routine. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything that followed. While these traditional foods were quietly disappearing from American kitchens, something much bigger was unfolding behind the closed doors of the Sugar Research Foundation in Washington. In 1965, this industry trade group paid 3 scientists at Harvard University, the equivalent of roughly $50,000 in today's money, to write a literature review for one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. The review appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, and it was designed to settle a question that researchers had been fighting over for more than a decade. What was really driving the epidemic of heart disease that was killing American men in middle age? The Harvard researchers examined dozens of existing studies and reached a conclusion that would reshape American nutrition for the next 50 years. They declared there was, in their own words, no doubt that the only dietary change needed to prevent coronary heart disease was reducing cholesterol and saturated fat intake. Study after study linking sugar to cardiovascular problems was systematically downplayed or dismissed. Research implicating sucrose was dismantled. And here is the part that went undiscovered until 2016. The Sugar Research Foundation's funding and direct involvement in shaping the review was never disclosed to the journal, to the public, or to the thousands of scientists who would cite this paper as gospel for decades to come. The New England Journal of Medicine did not even begin requiring conflict of interest disclosures until 1984, nearly 20 years after the damage was done. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover food history and forgotten traditions every week, and the next one connects directly to what we are talking about right now. That single compromised paper set off a chain reaction through the entire American food supply. Within a decade, the federal government issued sweeping new dietary guidelines urging every American to slash their saturated fat intake. Butter, lard, whole milk, red meat, and eggs, the exact ingredients that had anchored the 1960s kitchen table, were suddenly branded the enemies of public health. But the food industry didn't just follow the guidelines, it exploited them. Companies responded with a tidal wave of low-fat products, skim milk in plastic jugs, tubs of margarine, fat-free cookies on grocery store end caps, and diet frozen dinners stacked in freezer aisles from coast to coast. and to make those bland, cardboard-tasting low-fat products palatable enough to sell. Manufacturers loaded them with refined sugar and processed carbohydrates. The numbers tell the rest of the story with brutal clarity. Between 1910 and 1970, American butter consumption dropped from 18 pounds per person per year to just 4. Lard consumption fell by 78%. Meanwhile, vegetable oil consumption, including margarine, shortening, and industrial seed oils, surged by over 400%. Americans didn't simply eat less fat. They swapped the natural animal fats their grandmothers cooked with for industrially processed hydrogenated oils, many of which contain trans fats that would eventually be linked to the very heart disease they were marketed to prevent. But the irony didn't stop with the oils. The low-fat craze that swept grocery stores in the 1980s and 1990s created an entire generation of processed food that was technically lighter in fat, yet heavier in everything else. Fat-free salad dressings loaded with corn syrup, yogurt cups with more sugar than a candy bar, cereal boxes marketed as heart-healthy breakfast options that were closer to dessert than actual nutrition. A man in 1962 would have eaten 3 eggs fried in lard and walked to work feeling full until lunch. His grandson in 1995 was eating a bowl of sugary cereal with skim milk and crashing by 10 in the morning. And the weight kept climbing. By 2002, the typical American man had gained 25 pounds since 1960, stepping on the bathroom scale at 191. By the most recent CDC measurements, that number has reached 199. For perspective, women in America today weigh roughly the same as men did in 1960. Men between 60 and 74 gain the most dramatic weight of any age group, packing on nearly 33 pounds compared to men the same age in the early 1960s. Severe obesity, which barely registered as a statistical category when the government first started tracking weight in 1960, now affects nearly 1 in 10 American adults. Now, it would be tempting to turn this into a tidy villain story. Corrupt scientists, clueless regulators, innocent grandpas betrayed by their own government. But the truth runs deeper than that, and you deserve the full picture. Raw milk genuinely can harbor dangerous bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Some of the bans on organ meats and food additives exist for legitimate safety reasons that have prevented real illness. Lard is not some magical superfood, no matter how well your grandmother's pie crust turned out. And the men of the 1960s carried advantages that went far beyond anything on their dinner plates. They walked to work and to the corner store. In 1960, America had 430 automobiles for every 1,000 people. And today that number exceeds 800. Their children played in the yard until the streetlights flickered on, not in front of glowing screens with a bag of chips within arm's reach. But the sugar industry corruption was real. Internal memos proved it. Peer-reviewed research published in 2016 confirmed the depth of the deception decades after the dietary damage was already baked into federal policy. The guidelines that followed were shaped by compromised science and industry lobbying that reached the highest levels of academic medicine. And the banning or restriction of traditional whole foods did strip options from the American table that had nourished families for generations without incident. The obesity epidemic did not grow from any single villain. It emerged from a food system that gradually replaced simple, recognizable ingredients with processed, engineered products designed to be consumed in larger quantities, more frequently, with less effort, and at higher profit margins for the companies manufacturing them. What your grandfather ate in 1962 was not a diet plan from a magazine. It was just food. Cooked at home, served in reasonable portions, eaten together at a table with his family. His plate was smaller. His glass held less. Every ingredient on that table had a name he could pronounce, prepared in a kitchen by someone he trusted. We did not just lose those foods over the last 60 years. We lost the entire way they were eaten. And maybe that is the part worth sitting with for a while. If this story stayed with you, there's one on screen right now, about the quiet everyday habits from the 1960s that kept men healthy well into their 70s. It picks up right where this one leaves off.